Welcome to the MS-Perspektive podcast, Perspective with a K as I'm German. I'm Nele von Horsten, MS patient, patient advocate and author. I'm bringing you interviews, inspiration and information about living with multiple sclerosis and show you ways how you can positively influence the disease and make the best out of your diagnosis. On ms-perspektive.com you will find the show notes, 11 free tips as a PDF and lots of other information. And now the show begins. Thanks for tuning in again and welcome to episode number 69, Beyond Boundaries, Advocacy, Research and Recognition in MS with Rachel Horne. Hello Rachel, it's such a pleasure to have you on the show and hello to London.
And hello there, hello back. And thank you very much for having me on. It's a great privilege.
And it's great to have you on the show. But before we actually start with the interview, it would be lovely if you could introduce yourself to the audience so they know who is with me on the podcast today.
Okay, it's Rachel Horne. Rachel, I was born in Canada, as you're probably picking up from my accent, but I've lived in the UK now for more than 30 years. I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis in 2009 when I was 43 years old. A little bit about me, I live in London with my husband and I have 2 adult children. And I have to say, most of my hobbies, I wish I could say something incredibly creative, but it's pretty much reading and gardening.
Reading and gardening is fantastic. There's nothing bad about it. There's no such thing as too many books, I think. Okay, so I would love to start with your personal experiences and coping strategies. Can you briefly share your personal journey with MS and how it has impacted your life?
Absolutely. I was 43, as I said. I was seemingly, fit and healthy, 5K runs, occasional visits to the doctors. But other than that, no health problems. I did notice one day pins and needles in my right hand, which over the next couple of days traveled up my arm. And I thought it was probably something to do with a pinched nerve. But over time, it got worse and worse. So by the end of the week, I went to see my GP, who very quickly sent me off for an MRI. And within the next week, I was admitted to Queen Square Hospital in London with a severe relapse. By then, I had started seeing an MS consultant, and they carried out a series of tests, blood tests, lumbar puncture, and they, at the end, when I was in the hospital there, they came and said, MS is very much on the cards, which was an awful shock to me, because it was something a disease I knew very little about. There was no sort of familiar links, or it wasn't as if it was one of those things where the light bulb went on and I'd said, look, I've had these strange symptoms over the years. I knew something was wrong, but we never get to the bottom of it. I don't know. I'd be interesting to hear about your diagnosis history. But I immediately thought to myself, "Oh gosh, am I going to end up in a wheelchair? And will it be in a matter of months or years?" Luckily, I did recover from that severe relapse, or recover about 90% from that relapse. And as for the impact of MS, it's mixed. On one side, let's be positive. I think it has made me much more appreciative of every day. And it caused me to focus on activities and people that are supportive. And I'll be honest with you, there are a few people that I'm no longer friends with because it was just too much effort and time. I also tend not to look into the future because it's probably not a good idea for any of us, and especially I think if you have MS. On the negative side, and there's negatives do come with MS. I think I have lost out on a lot. I am envious of people who could do things, say, on the spur of the moment, who have lots of energy and don't have to plan or always come up with a backup plan, a just in case plan. Also, I've given up certain things which I really love doing, like tennis and skiing and running. And, look, I do feel wistful looking back and thinking, what happens if I didn't have MS? How would my life be different? But I can't dwell too much on that. And I think it means we just end up going down a dark rabbit hole. So I'm trying to end on a positive note, because on the other way, I've met a lot of wonderful people through MS, which I probably would never have met before. But on balance, would I prefer life without MS? Absolutely.
I think every one of us would prefer life without MS, but yes, you have to take what life offers you, I guess.
Yes, and sometimes you don't like that.
Yep. That's normal. So maybe can you talk about what was your rock bottom with multiple sclerosis and how did you fight your way back out? Because this, I think, is always important, because not everybody knows how to fight their way back, and it's always good to hear from the experiences from others.
Yeah, no, look, I definitely did hit a rock bottom. It wasn't at the beginning of my diagnosis, because I think I just thought I sort of got on with it. And I had, my children were younger then, and you sort of, or at least for me, I just had to sort of keep on going with it. But I remember, I think my rock bottom was in 2015, so about 6 years after I was diagnosed. And one afternoon I had a nap, and when I woke up, I had double vision in my left eye. Again, out of the blue, and that I've never fully recovered from. And for some reason, that was a real trigger for me. And I just saw my future as shrinking. I saw losses, and I thought, what's next? And I thought, how long is this going to go on, where you keep on fighting to try and get back to adjust to a new normal? I mean, it is exhausting. And I started wondering about, who I was. Was I less as a person with a lifelong disease, this accruing of disabilities? And what would it mean for my family, for my husband, for my kids? What would happen if they would have to start looking after me a heck of a lot more? Did I want that? And I'll be absolutely honest with you. I did think about, suicide briefly. And that's when I realized at that point that I had to try and do something to get myself out of this hole. And for me, I started seeing a therapist because I also wanted to talk to somebody in a safe environment, but also I didn't want to be constantly offloading to my husband. And I certainly didn't want to do it to my kids. I didn't want to do it to my friends. And at that point, I wasn't that very well embedded in the MS world with people with MS. So I was trying to kind of do it all myself. And I realized I couldn't do that. I also went on antidepressants, which I'm still on today, which has helped with warding off the depression and the anxiety. So it did take a while. But I did come out of that hole, and I think I'm much more aware when there's sort of the slight warning signals, and I think, okay, hang on, Rachel, things are getting a bit dark. Let's just back off, and let's readjust.
Yeah, thank you for being so open, because I think thoughts about suicide is something that happens to many out of our community, and it's important to talk about it, and it's important to say, hey, come on, there are options. You can go to a therapist, you can use medication, you can find out with a specialist what is needed, and maybe adjust it over time, and that's very important. I did psychotherapy in 2015, I think, around about 2015. Not so much about the MS, but of course, MS was a big part of it.
Yeah. And I agree with you. And sometimes they're professionals. That's what they do. And I don't mind adding that I've found it's been hugely valuable to get support out of the MS world, and just speaking to some people with MS, where you don't have to do a sort of preamble and say, oh, in MS, this is what happens and you can't do that, you do that. I've found that really valuable to help my mental health, because there's always somebody else who's been in the same situation as you, and they can offer advice. And I think it's shortcuts, isn't it? You sit down in a group of people with MS, and you can almost laugh about different symptoms and what's happened. Oh gosh, do you remember the time I fell over? And I mean, you wouldn't dare do that to people who don't have MS. But that, I think, and everybody says, oh, find your support group. But I have found that hugely beneficial.
Yes, yeah, absolutely agree on that. So how are you currently doing with your MS?
Well, actually, I'm doing much better than I thought. If you'd asked me 15 years ago when I came out of the hospital, I just sort of, saw bleak and blackness ahead of me. So my walking is not fantastic. I wear a brace, but I'm still, as I said, I'm not running or doing any of the exercise, doing any of the sports which require a lot of balance, about a mobility, about quick fire responses. But for long distance walks, which I still go on, use 2 poles. My husband and I are just about to finish the Cotswold Way, which is 100 miles. Along the Cotswolds in Western England. And, we're taking it in short chunks, but it's been absolutely fantastic to get out there. And I think that, that always helps, doesn't it? Being outside and seeing different things. I have permanent double vision in my left eye. Yeah, things are slowing down. I think it's funny sometimes. You don't know what sometimes is linked to, say, aging, because I am 58, or the MS. And sometimes it's really difficult to juggle the slowing down. I do think probably most of it's to do with MS, but I do think it's also aging. Right now I'm on my 3rd disease-modifying treatment, Ocrevus. I was on Copaxone, which I understand you're very familiar with, and then Tecfidera, which we know is the oral pill. But that didn't work out so well for me. And I've been on Ocrevus for, I think, 4 or 5 years, and it seems to be keeping the MS at bay. So I'm really thankful that I can have that treatment.
Great. Yeah, it's, they think, the studies proved that there is some effect on the neurodegeneration part. And I think when you become older, that is a more important thing in life. Yeah,
yeah.
But of course, there's also menopause and aging and all these things come together.
Oh, that's what it gets me, because and it's so difficult, I think, because MS has so many different symptoms. You sort of Google something that's happened to you, bang, somebody with MS has it. So it's so easy we just chuck everything on my MS. So I didn't sort of pick up that, I was perimenopausal. And I thought, oh my gosh, my MS is getting worse. And it just happened, so I'm also now on hormone replacement therapies, which seem to be very effective. So I think sometimes it is a bit of a juggling act. Is it aging? Is it menopause? It could be something else. Maybe it's just, a virus or an infection. So sometimes you kind of do want hard and fast answers, but sometimes you don't always get them, do you? You've got this trial and error.
Yeah, absolutely. And Professor Gavin Giovannoni, who is, I guess, very familiar to you, has stated a very important thing. You should concentrate to try to improve all these little bits and pieces. So have good infection prevention with.
Yes. No, I do agree with you. And I don't know if you found with your experience, I think when I was diagnosed with MS, the first thing that popped up, is physical, isn't it? Am I going to be in a wheelchair?
Mm-hmm.
And then
Absolutely.
I think that maybe you sometimes, I don't know if you found this too, because it sounds like we've been diagnosed around the same time. As you get older, the longer you live with the disease, or maybe it's because the more people you meet with MS, I'm now more worried about cognitive degeneration.
Yes, let's say that's the thing I'm most afraid of.
Yes, because that's us, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. And luckily, so doing sports seems to help there as well, and of course, medication is helpful. But whatever you can do, and try to avoid comorbidities, or if you have them, then treat them well. So whatever you can do it. So yeah. I stopped drinking alcohol, for example, more or less completely. And at least I think it helps me. If it does, who knows? But for me, it feels good. And trying to eat healthy. Of course, I eat chips every now and then.
Yes, but I agree with you. It's general. And I think even if you didn't have MS, it's probably a good idea. It was something I was, I think one of your questions a bit later on about, what can we do as patients rather than just saying, say relying on the drugs and saying, hold on, I'm on this, let them do their job. I think it is a partnership, isn't it?
Absolutely. And we have to live a healthy life to help as best as possible.
Yeah.
And then I think it's okay if things happen, because then I did whatever I could, and if things are happening now, I can readjust to it.
I think
it's fine with me.
Yeah, you kind of think, well, hold on, I did my best, and you try and control what you can control, right?
Yes, And you have to accept that not everything is controllable for healthy and for people with a chronic disease.
Yeah.
So in your experience, what are some of the most effective coping strategy or self-care practices for managing the daily challenges of living with MS?
Well, a few. And I'd love to tell you that, of course, I rigorously do them every single day and I'm absolutely perfect. And that's not quite so true. But what I found, and this comes through learning, and I wish I'd learned it from day one, but it never quite works that way, does it? Is, as we've been talking about, take each day as it comes. Remember, we don't get this day again. And I think that applies for all of us, doesn't it? We just don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I found really valuable seeking out others who have MS. And I found that so valuable because it makes you also feel less alone. I mean, this disease can be awfully isolating, even if you've got a wonderful supporting family and friends around you. People with MS just get it. And we don't mind being supportive for each other because we've been there. Also, I find it's a question of also education. I mean, there's obviously different levels that we get on, but listening to podcasts like this one, reading up on it. I'm not saying we have to go out there and become a scientist and read all the papers because sometimes they can be overwhelming. But try and educate yourself on how you can make life better for yourself with MS. And also, I think because if you keep abreast of the news, and I think, we're very lucky in some ways in MS. I mean, luck in MS is a bit of an odd, but we've got nearly over 20 disease modifying therapies out there. There's been huge strides in the last 25 years. We've got options. And if one drug doesn't work for us, there's another one there. And I think there's also a growing awareness of, neurodegeneration, brain health, what we can do for that. So I think we have to kind of hang on to that, if you compare it to other diseases, say Parkinson's or dementia, they're quite far behind. So we have been very fortunate that way. And also I think there's some incredible research going on in MS. So I'm very thankful for that. Another thing which I think is worth mentioning is all about control. We can't control MS. We can try, but there are some things that we can do for ourselves, and diet. And I know there's no one special MS diet. Wish there was, but there isn't. We haven't found out yet. But lots of fruits and vegetables, fiber, to feel better, to maximize our energy. And to also, I think, as you mentioned earlier, to avoid future diseases such as high blood pressure, high cholesterol, because I think people with MS, we know, are living longer lives. So maybe before it wasn't so much of a factor where it is now, and how we can do our best to avoid comorbidities, because that just puts extra pressure. As for exercise, absolutely important, and probably even more important if you have MS. And that makes you feel better. I mean, if you ever come back from exercise saying, well, that was a complete and utter waste of time and I hated it, I mean, you feel worse. And again, it's about pacing yourself, because I don't know about you, but the next day I usually have to kind of build in a rest period because it just takes me that much longer to recuperate. Strength and balance. It can help with your bowel and bladder control, decrease spasticity. And I think it's a whole thing about there isn't one exercise that is the best one. Some people love swimming. Some people love dancing. It's just everything, but just do what you love and keep on doing it. And as for the brain health, I know that's also very important. Challenge yourself. I'm not saying go out there and learn the trombone, but do things that challenge you. If it's reading something a bit different, or crossword puzzles, all those things, just to keep that healthy too.
Yes.
And, something that, it's so easy to kind of, just vegetate and think, poor me. And look, I've certainly done that before, but, luckily, hopefully we've got a long road ahead of us. So let's try and take care of ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And while we are doing that interview, I think RIMS is happening. So the Rehabilitation in MS meeting. So the podcast will go live a bit later. But Ulrich Dalgas was my interview guest for a show, and he was telling exactly what you did. Of course, they are doing research on all these exercise things, but in the end, the important thing is you keep on doing it. and whatever is the right thing for you and whatever you like, if it's dancing, football playing, I don't know, Zumba, whatever it is, as long as you exercise, it's fantastic, and try to challenge yourself with exercise, but also with mental or brain exercise. And then it's good for you. Even so, maybe there is not for all types of sports evidence-based medicine yet there.
Yes, I know. I mean, I think we all want to know, if you go on, cycling is the thing, or biking cycling or swimming is the thing. But as you said, I think it's one of those things, what works for you. Or else you might find you prefer doing something social, as you said, like the ballroom dancing, where you get the interaction with people, whereas say maybe cycling is more of a solitary activity.
Yeah, whatever makes you happy and whatever you keep on doing, fantastic. Yeah. And for sports, it's always good if you do muscle training and the long fitness thing with swimming, running, whatever, or being on the motormate. You can do whatever. Rachel, I was coming over your site when I heard about the Rachel Horne Prize for women's research in MS, and I found it very fantastic. So let's talk about this a bit more. What inspired you to establish a prize specifically for female researchers in the field of multiple sclerosis, and what do you hope to achieve?
Okay, I started getting involved in MS, from a patient point of view. And I think we very quickly find out that MS affects women 2 to 3 times. And it's possibly, this ratio, compared to men, this ratio is actually even growing. So we've got about 70% of people with MS are women. And that's just the way it is. So the first time I attended ECTRIMS, I don't know, I'll just sort of say it's the, European Committee for Treatment and Research in MS. And as you very well know, I'm sure your listeners do too, it's the biggest MS conference, which is held annually over several days. And there's about 10,000 up to 10,000 people attending in the MS scientific community. And there's lectures, there's panels. I mean, it's very exciting, and that's where you go. It's one of the places you go to find out what's going on in MS research. So I remember going there in 2017, and I was shocked by how little mention there was of female patients, considering they made up, more than two-thirds of the patient group. And also, I think we were lumped in, or saw ourselves being lumped in the patient group, even though obviously, as we're all very aware, women are very different from men. With our differences, and we also have our unique health challenges. Be it from periods through to contraception, pregnancy, breastfeeding, and then menopause. And, so how do you cope with those at the same time with coping with MS? And does it make a difference? So I did notice there didn't seem to be a focus particularly on female patients. There was very few group discussions. They were kind of tucked away to the side, sort of, over there. Oh, well, you can go over there, but that's going to cause a pregnancy and all, And I also, at the same time, I did notice, and this is back in 2017, and things have changed very much, but on the panels and on giving the lectures, and I did the numbers, it was 30% women speaking, women experts getting up there, and 70% was men. So women, it seemed to me, were invisible on both hands, not invisible, overlooked, not only as patients, but also women experts speaking about MS. And I thought this actually is not right. So I thought, how can we get around this? And I also looked at the existing prizes in MS, and there's the Branchek Award. 20% go to just 20% go to women neurologists and neuroscientists. Distal Prize 10%, and the Charcot Prize just 5%. And you might just say, what does it matter? Awards, but awards are they do matter. They are important, and they are valuable for several reasons, because they say, this person makes a difference. This person is important, and they bring validation. And I also think in medicine, they're very important, because if you get an award, you probably have you probably have a greater chance to get funding, which is very important in medicine. You send a clear message to those starting out that you matter. If you look like me, one day you can also have an award. So that's why I decided to set up the Rachel Horne Prize, and it's a prize for women scientists in MS, and it has to be about women's research in MS.
Fantastic. Yes, I couldn't agree more, and I think that's an issue in all different kind of indications, but especially MS, that is important to us. Yeah, where you have the 25 to 75% unbalanced in patients. And yes, all these researchers are doing a great job, and women need some additional support. So what criteria are used to select the winner of the research prize, and how is the selection process structured to ensure fairness and transparency?
I pretty much left that to the International Women in MS, because they had a lot more experience in dealing with this. So the criteria they've come up with, which we used before last year, was they take a look at the application form. 25% goes on the track record. 25% goes on publications, also including innovation. 25% goes on research and significance of an impact, and 25% is on research, leadership, and vision, totaling 100%. And it's ranked 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so as soon as the applications come in, there's a group of 7 judges. And if there's any conflict of interest, they immediately declare them, and then they recuse themselves from actually judging. And then they go on to judge it, and they come up with the final answers. And whoever wins gets the highest score is the winner. And so what they last year did to me is they said, "This is the winner," and that was the winner. And because quite frankly, I judge, I trust them in their judgment. And it's very important. I think International Women in MS, there's a selection of 7 judges. And they're from expertise. There's a range of expertise and geographical diversity.
Okay, great.
Yes, and so so I think they were chosen very wisely about that.
That's great. I have to get somebody from that group as an interview partner. It's always good to have interviews to get new ideas for new interview partners. So can you tell us about the funding model for this prize and how you ensure sustainability over time? Because it's quite decent.
Yes, no, absolutely, and I think that was important. And I'll just tell you a little bit about about how it came about and the funding. When my father died about 15 years ago, he left quite a substantial chunk of money that was to be held and was to be that the 3 of us, myself and my 2 other siblings, would distribute on an annual basis for charity. And we each had a pot that was up to us to decide how we wanted to distribute it. For me, it's always been, from the start, it's been advocating and funding and supporting work of women and girls and multiple sclerosis for research for obvious reasons. And I think it's sort of getting back to why I realize that, look, there's huge issues when it comes to gender inequality, and there's no one person, I'd love to say there is, but there's no one person that could solve it. So I thought actually doing an award might make sense, because I think it's quite immediate, isn't it? And it will happen quickly, and it doesn't take a huge load to set up. So that is the money, and we decided on $40,000 because it was the same as the John Distill Award, so something with impact. And also, so at the moment, I cannot see any reason, because the money's good, that this can go on as long. The award will go on as long as possible until, say, somebody like maybe International Women in MS turn around to me one day and say, "Look, we've been doing it for a while. Things have equaled out among the other awards outside of us. So let's call it a day." And also, if you want the honest truth, in a way, I wish I didn't have to set up this award, do we? I mean, we just kind of wish these things would be natural and equal. And growing up, I think I was told that too. Oh, don't worry, everything will equal out, and there will be gender equality. So, as you said, let's see what happens. It might end up disappearing, and that suits me just as well. Fine,
yeah,
too.
Yeah. If that happens, everything is fine, right? Then we would love to see that happen. I would love to see that happen for my daughters, but not sure about it.
Absolutely. And I don't know, especially for me growing up, everything was going to be sorted and it was going to be a lovely world. And here we are still having to fight battles. So hopefully for your daughter, it will be different.
Yes. Well, so who is... no, you already said that. Who is involved in deciding the winner for the research prize? So I don't need
sorry
to.
About that. I sort of jumped.
No. That's totally fine. It's just because there's also the blog article. For everybody who doesn't know, you can read through the blog article and then you will find the questions. But Rachel already answered that question. So you told me on a side note when we were discussing the interviews that you also funded research into MS and domestic violence and abuse. And I found that very interesting. I never thought about that issue. But what led to this? And are there already initial findings and perhaps even ideas on how victims can be helped?
Yeah. Well, it was really interesting because I was sort of thinking back to it. What was the trigger? And I wish I could tell you, but I can't think of anything in particular. But it does kind of make sense because I remember reading somewhere that people with disabilities are much more vulnerable to domestic abuse and violence. And in particular, we do know statistically for women with disabilities, it's 2 to 3 times as much. And we also know, as I mentioned earlier, and as you very much know, that women are much more likely to get MS 2 to 3 times compared to men. So we're sort of looking at that, and I'm thinking, hold on, you've got vulnerability, disability, and women, and we know, domestic violence abuse is largely, it's very much gender based. Yes, there are men with MS that are victims of domestic violence abuse, but it's much smaller. So I started looking into this, and there are some studies, but very, very few. And there was also nothing particularly measurable. And when it comes to scientists, they love having data, don't they? Personal anecdotes are not enough. So I thought, how can we get data on this? And how can we actually start saying, look, this is an issue. We should be looking for it rather than just saying, I think it's out there, but I'm not getting involved. And also it's an incredibly complex subject, isn't it? I mean, if it was solvable, I think it would have been solved quickly, a long time ago. So what I decided to do, I was very fortunate that I was approached by Professor Nikos Evangelou at the University of Nottingham and Professor Helen Ford at the University of Leeds. And what they noticed during COVID, especially during lockdown, that some of their female patients were victims of domestic violence and abuse. Maybe it had become greater, or maybe they were just revealing more. And they wondered what to do about this. And, what was the process? Somebody approaches you and opens up about it. What's the next steps? How do you do the next steps also so you're not putting them in danger? And is there the facilities there to support them? So we decided to set up the MS Domestic Violence and Abuse Research Initiative based at the University of Leeds and Nottingham, so the 2 universities. And so we've got 2 PhD students looking at it, one from the side of, women or people with MS who have experienced it or are experiencing it on one hand, and the other PhD is on healthcare professionals and what's their reaction and how do they deal with it? Because it's also hugely emotional too, isn't it? And then on top of that, we've just got a postdoc, a research fellow who's just started who will be combining the 2. And I think the first thing that we're trying to do is find out how common it is. So I know in England, and I don't know if you're familiar with anything happening in Europe or Germany, I was going to ask you about screening, because when women in Germany, when you go in during your pregnancy, are you ever asked, do you feel safe at home?
No. At least I never experienced it for my 2 pregnancies.
Yes. Okay, so it might be there, or you might whatever.
Yeah.
But in the UK, this is what you are supposed to do. You go in and they
Okay.
say, "I ask this of every patient.
Mhm.
It will happen all the time. Don't think I'm signaling you out. And it's a government decree. This is what I do."
Mhm.
And they do it when the woman she has to be on her own. Even though she might arrive with her partner, they make sure she's on her own and they will ask her. And so we do have that background here. So we thought, why shouldn't we extend it to people with MS
Mhm.
and being able to ask them and saying, we're doing this to everybody. It will be regular and it will just be part of our contact, because we do know people with MS do have regular healthcare appointments. So thankfully there is that contact. But how do you do it sensitively? Training and to see. And it's interesting because North Cumbria, which is a region, they've been doing that for everybody. So not just for all their patients. And I spoke to an MS nurse there, and I'm going to be doing an interview with her. And she thinks about 10% of her MS patients say they don't feel safe, which is a big number. Look, I at the moment, I want to interview again to make sure it's absolutely concrete, and find out more information. What age is it? Is it the more disabled you get, the more vulnerable you are? And it's quite interesting because it's not just violence and sexual abuse, but it could be also emotional abuse. And it also could be financial, taking their PIN card. Could also be it could also be taking away their mobility devices, taking away the batteries out of their wheelchair, hiding and also threatening to take away their children. So it is complicated. And also it's finding out that it's also the carers can be involved. Children can be, abusing their parents, and also healthcare professionals. So I think that's the next step, is getting some data on it and then just seeing how common this problem is. But it's a big topic, and it's not, let's face it, it's not just limited to MS.
No, of course not. When you mentioned that point up front the interview, I thought about a movie on public television where they had it for somebody, I don't know if he had dementia or Parkinson, and the kids, because they were so stressed out, I mean the grown-up kids, 50 or 60, whatever, did not treat the dad nicely. So I guess it's very complex. But still, it should be avoided wherever it's possible, and it's not you are bad or whatever, but it has to happen something.
Yeah, and I do agree. Look, it's also a huge burden. I'm not, I'm not saying, but it's also a huge burden on carers too, isn't it? And I'm not excusing it and saying therefore they should have to, but I do think we have to recognize where this comes out of. And also, on the flip side, if a woman decides that she's going to leave, or a person could decide to leave, also a lot of these shelters and refuges are not equipped for disabled people. The ramps on the ground floor. So again, huge questions about funding, and also on the healthcare professional side, how do they do something? Because if they're sitting beside their perpetrator, you can't just slide over a brochure saying, are you a victim of domestic violence and abuse? This is what you should do. So it's quite a naughty problem, but I think growing awareness is a start.
Absolutely. And really thank you for that. And I will ask one of these persons to come to my show, so maybe I can help a little bit in increasing awareness of it, because I think it's very, very important. So thank you very much for doing something there. So let's talk a bit about exploring the influence of gender and ethnicity. How important do you think is it to study the impact of gender and ethnicity on the diagnosis and treatment of neurological disorders?
I think it's hugely important. In fact, I think it's essential. And I think, and you probably are very knowledgeable about this, and so are your listeners, is that we used to think of MS as a white person's disease. And, and our big international studies reflect that. But I think the more over time we're realizing that isn't quite so. And, unfortunately it seems to impact almost everybody. And also, I think if you make generalizations from one cohort of populations, that doesn't necessarily jump over to other groups from different ethnic backgrounds, such as, or non-white backgrounds, such as someone from a South Asian or an African or Ashkenazi Jewish or other historical backgrounds. So, there's a lot of talk, I think, especially in the MS world or in the world of health in general, on personalized treatment. So you can't really have a personalized treatment, I think, until you are able to make research data on all different backgrounds. And so I think it is absolutely essential. And I think it has been an area that has been overlooked. But again, I do think there now is a growing awareness that impact, we know MS affects us all differently. So why shouldn't we have studies reflecting that? And let's see if let's make this sort of without even thinking. Let's see this happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I had Damien Washington on the show, who is now living in Europe, but is originally from the US, and he is a Black American. And the prevalence in, let's say, the ethnicity is much higher than expected. And I had Trishna, who is from Asia by her, let's say, genetics. And of course, there are a lot of issues. And yes, we find now the reason why the European Caucasian have a higher chance of getting MS due to living together with the animals and whatsoever. But we don't know what is the reason for the African American or the Asian. And it might be different reasons. And that's why there might be a different approach important. So I think research is also doing some, if you look only in one direction, you will find things there, but you have to look into all directions, and then you will find other interesting research outcomes. Yeah. So I think it's very important.
I think it's absolutely brilliant. And, to hear from Damien and also to hear from Trishna, who's done so much, because in the US, you've got a larger Black population, whereas obviously in the UK, you've got larger South Asian population. And I think also, as you said, how can we best include everybody rather than go for the usual suspects or the group that we know we can get easy access to?
Yes, and there will be reasons for the Hispanics. So I did not have a patient here yet, but that will change for sure.
And I think I mentioned to you, I went to get my Ocrevus infusion, Royal London Hospital, the middle of London, and there's a very mixed cohort of people with MS in there, and so you think, well, hang on, the studies should reflect this.
Yeah, absolutely. So what studies would you consider helpful in examining and addressing disparities in the treatment of neurological disorders?
Okay, I do know that the ADAM study is ongoing. I don't know. I'll sort of mention it. It's going to be a 10-year study. Looking at investigating how genes affect the risk of getting MS in people from different ethnic backgrounds. And that's being led by Dr. Ben Adams. And so that will be ongoing. So I know he's already been getting some responses, but it'll be interesting to see. I do know in the US, and I'm not as familiar with the US, there's a big DNA biobank at the University of California at San Francisco. And that's also, they've much more of a Hispanic population there in that area. So they're also looking in there's Hispanic and Latina populations. There's MS in Black American study. So I do think there are studies going on. And I was also, and it'll be interesting to see if the same thing, do you know by chance, is going on, say, in Germany?
Yeah, I'm not aware of it, let's say.
Yeah.
I'm struggling with an answer. I'm not aware of it. It doesn't mean it's not happening.
Yes.
But of course, we are not as mixed as the US, for example, or like the UK, because due to history, that we started and lost 2 world wars. And so it was not so easy for other people to get into our system. But for example, we should do something with the Turkish population. who came from there, or Italian. That could help already a bit.
And it'll be very interesting to see and why certain populations appear not to get MS. Because I know, coming from Canada, we've got a very high level of MS, but yet the Inuit people in the north who, don't really get much sun, they've got a very low incidence of it. Why? Because they're not getting vitamin D, they're not getting sun. So shouldn't they have a lot more MS? And what sort of neuroprotects them? So I think it's all these sort of strange questions we've got, and that's why I think it's so important to have these studies.
Absolutely, yes, because then it could help with advice what you can do to avoid it, or to let's say at least get a milder course or whatsoever.
Yeah.
Lots of options. So how can researchers improve diversity in clinical trials to increase our understanding and improve outcomes for all patients?
Okay, well, I have been thinking about that because I'm also on a PPI group that is a policy research unit for the UK government for the health and social on dementia and neurodegenerative diseases. So I think it was really important that we got PPI, meaning patient and public involvement and engagement, not just a diverse group of people. And I think, yes, it's early days. We do have our group, but it was very much, this takes more work. It takes time, and it also takes trust. And I think we have to remember, and especially in the US, there was a lot of egregious things happened in the from the scientific community to different populations, especially the Black population. So you can understand why there is some distrust and wariness there. What is this for? And why? So I think the onus is on the people who are creating the clinical trials to get as diverse group as possible, and so to make sure everybody feels inclusive. And how do you do that? Does it think about thinking outside the box? I mean, in this day and age, we've got, look at us, video conferencing. Mm-hmm. Can more things be done remotely? Because maybe not everybody has access to a car and they can't drive in for face-to-face meetings or transport. And it's paying people. Hold on, they're giving up their time. They're probably giving up their blood, their urine. And we all know when it comes to MS trials, it usually involves an MRI, which is not the most pleasant thing on the world. So take care of people. Ask them what their needs are. Ask them if they're leaving behind children or elderly parents. And how can we, reimburse you for that? So I think, I also think there's been some really good work done by Mitzi Joy Williams, who's a Black neurologist in Atlanta. And she said, get involved, ask these questions at the beginning of clinical trials. How do you reach out, harder to reach patients? How can you do that? Because they do want to get involved, but sometimes there's big question marks that it might not work for them, but make it work for them.
Yeah. Very good. And so we can move on to your patient advocate activities, which you mentioned already in the questions up front. But how do your experiences feed into patient advocacy, and how do you try to contribute to this study design?
Yeah, that's been interesting because I think I've got my lived experience of MS, and the other two people I'm working with have lived experience as carers, looking after, one of them looks after parents with dementia, and the other person, Mohammed, he runs a charity for dementia in Black and minority ethnic groups. So it has taken time. We've had to do a lot of reading, a lot of thinking outside the box, and also about gender, because I think I came across something which I thought was quite interesting, because people who are usually involved in patient and public engagement, the majority, the most thing that sticks out is they're usually white, female, and 60 plus. Okay, I'm nearly there. So I think it's really easy to rely on tapping on what we call over here is tapping on the shoulder. Some people, they're reliable, they've been down this road before, and you tap them on the shoulder and say, hey, do you want to get involved? Because it's just easier, isn't it? And also I think it's less challenging because their probably viewpoints are going to agree with yours. So how do you go outside that? So what we've done is, for one thing, relied on making up a recruitment poster that was, simple. Not meaning simple, but it was simple words. It was visual, and it was saying straight out, we want to reach groups that would traditionally have not been involved in research, and also going through it and trying to make the group as supportive as possible and easy. And sometimes that is more difficult, but I think it's worth it because there's some insights they come up with and you think, gosh, I never thought of that. Why didn't I think of that? We just make assumptions, don't we? And let's face it, we all have unconscious biases. And I know I do. It's just the way we are.
Yes, and depending on how creative your mind is, sometimes it's going very interesting routes and they are far away from reality, yes.
Yeah. And let's face it, it does kind of challenge you to think outside the box. And sometimes we don't like doing that, do we?
Yeah. But yeah, I really like when I work together with teams where it's all diverse and it's always interesting. It always helps you. So what do you... Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, no, go ahead. I agree with you. It always is beneficial. And you come out of there thinking, oh, gosh, yeah, never thought of that.
Yes. So what do you want to achieve with your contributions as editor of an MS research blog, and how do you choose the topics?
Okay, well, that kind of, I think my training as a journalist helps. And I also think just kind of listening, and you must be the same. You put your ear to the ground. What are people talking about? What are you picking up on social media? When you go to conferences, what are the questions that are coming up again? And I also think, and I don't know if I still continue to be surprised at the gulf between people who research MS and the patient group, because I just assumed when I got MS, these doctors, that's their specialty. They have over 1,000 or 1,500 patients. That's what happens in the UK. So they'll know. Of course they'll know with the patients and how they think and feel. And then you become a patient, you think, actually, no, there is this gulf. So it's kind of, I do have the flexibility of choosing what stories are out there, what's on people's minds. And also listening to what people are talking about, what they want to ask their neurologist, but they don't have the time because let's face it, an appointment is very, very short, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. 15 minutes here in Germany. There's not much time for questions.
Same in the UK. And it's sometimes, it's not the neurologist's fault. It's the healthcare, I don't say fault, but it's just the way it is. So that's, again, when we were sort of talking a little bit earlier about self-care, I think it has to be very much a partnership. What can we do to help our MS? But also sometimes with the professionals, a slight reminder that, making assumptions about patients is not always a good thing.
Yes, shared decision making. Yeah. I had Christoph Hesen on that topic. So what strategies do you think are effective in promoting patient engagement and research?
I think it's very difficult to do it well. There's no guidebook, is there? Just like most things in life. And there's no one size fits all because let's face it, we're dealing with MS, which is a very tricky disease because it doesn't, each person is different. It doesn't follow the path. But so I think with patient engagement, you definitely see that. But I think you've got to be flexible. You've got to be willing to abandon things that aren't working, depending on who you're reaching out to, and also listening and asking questions and letting people, because I think sometimes people with MS, they want to speak and just hearing them and what their stories are. And sometimes it's just the little things in life that they want to be recognized for. I saw something a short while ago by the Dr. Riley, and I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, Riley Bovin. She said, as neurologist, she said, sometimes I think we forget just how difficult life with MS is. And I want to thank all my patients as saying, I know you're trying hard. I know you haven't done all the exercise I asked you to do, but you've done it at half the time. And thank you, because it is a challenge. And I think that's the same with patient advocacy. This is a tough disease. You're doing well. And we support you.
Yes, but I think in that part, lots of things are happening. So even the few years, I'm really looking for information and looking for news. Lots of things are happening. So I really have to say, great, and let's move on in that direction.
Totally different from 2009. I don't know if you felt the same way. Sometimes it was a bit of a horror show looking for information.
Yes. So I was not looking for much information because it doesn't give me positive information.
No, and so you just sort of think, I have to stay off this Google because I'm going to dig a little hole and go into it.
Yes, and never stop crying again.
Yes.
So let's come to the Quickfire Q&A session. Complete the sentence for me. Multiple sclerosis is?
Challenging. Yes. There were a lot of words I could have put in there and probably a few swear words, which not probably you appreciate. It is challenging. And sometimes I think it's too challenging or way too challenging. But look, we have it and that's the way it is. And it's not going away.
Yeah. Which website can you recommend for people living with MS?
Okay, a bit of a minefield, isn't there? But I do tend to stick with MS Society. This is obviously more in the UK. MS Society, MS Trust, I think they do a great job at making clear, concise information. And also things like exactly what you're doing, podcasts. So you don't have to read, great lengthy research papers. I also find MS Australia, I don't know if you do, I found that really helpful, and also the National MS Society, and also you kind of know you're getting something that is evidence. It's not just rumor and anecdote and hearsay.
Yes. What development would you like to see in the field of multiple sclerosis in the next 5 years?
I think we sort of, touched on a bit. I think maybe self-monitoring. I think we're going to get that way. Right now, we don't. I think it would be easier if we had, and hopefully, something like a watch. Again, so you don't have to be, say, checking your phone, something that's doing the monitoring for all the time on your steps or the length of your steps or the gait and whatever. So I think that would be helpful. That's what I'd love to see. So you didn't have to think too much about it. And also, I think it's the way the health world is going. We can't just rely on our doctors to give us the information, and they've just got a short amount of time. And also, I think that, as you said, I think things are very promising. Yes, there are obstacles, but we are asking more questions about who we include in the studies, diversity, other issues. So I think we've got the drugs there, which is fantastic. Maybe we can take a bit of a pause and look at other things.
Yeah. Okay, so finally, what message of hope or encouragement would you like to share with individuals living with MS?
I think to somebody newly diagnosed, which is, it's a really tough time. And as I said, I was 43. Imagine if you're diagnosed at 15 or 20. That's really tough. But I want you, I think I would hope to say to somebody, look, I know it looks bleak and I know it's overwhelming, but we have treatments here. We know an awful lot about this disease, and there's more awareness of MS than ever before. I think I'd say, to have time to grieve, because it is a loss, but also, reach out to people. Reach out to people and find out what their experiences are. And so you find out you're not alone. I've just found, and listen to podcasts like this and realize there is support out there.
Yes. And I think there's lots of reason for hope that this will turn out better than you think at the beginning.
Yeah.
So how and where can interested people find you online?
Oh gosh, well, I'm on, I think, X now? On X, I've LinkedIn. I wish I was on more platforms, but I kind of, run out of, sometimes I think you run out of energy, don't you? And you think, oh gosh, I really should post that. So that's, I think, Twitter more or my emails. I think I'm also on if you look up the MS Rachel Horne Prize, I think my email's on there. So I think if you do want to find me, you can find me.
Fantastic. And I will bring all of that.
Yeah. And I don't mind on Twitter or X or whatever, if you, DM me either.
Fantastic. Rachel, thank you very much. Thank you very much for everything you do. And it was a pleasure to get to know you a bit better. And hopefully I will meet you at one of the upcoming ACTRIMS. I'm still thinking about if there is a chance for me to go to Copenhagen, but I think I will join this one virtually because my little one will be just half a year old. But yeah, I think we will meet in the future, and this will be very lovely. And I'm looking forward to it.
Fantastic. Listen, and thank you so much for having me on the podcast. And your questions were absolutely fantastic. Really made me think.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks a lot.
I hope you enjoyed the episode and learned something new. And maybe you even got inspired to raise your voice, because it is important that we as patients raise our voice to be recognized. By the way, next time I will be talking about another immunotherapy, and this time it will be about teriflunomide, which is known as Aubagio, and this will be the last one for mild and moderate disease courses. So please tune in again, rate the podcast wherever you are listening to podcasts, and recommend it to other people, and raise your voice like my baby does in the background. See you next time. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening today. I hope you found it helpful. You may also be interested in the previously published episodes and posts, which you can find at ms-perspektive.com/podcast. Perspective with a K. You can also get a free PDF with 11 tips for your positive impact on MS at ms-perspektive.com/newsletter. If you'd like to get in touch, you can reach me at nele@ms-perspektive.com or on social media. See you next time.